Under the dim glow of a single oil lamp, I sat beside the wooden window of my small hut, listening to the whisper of the night wind. The monastery was asleep, wrapped in the soft rhythm of silence that only mountains could hold. The crickets sang their endless hymns outside, and somewhere in the distance, a temple bell echoed faintly, as if marking the passing of a thought. I had always loved this hour, the thin veil between waking and dreaming, when the world seemed to breathe with me, slowly and deeply. My robe felt warm against my skin, still scented faintly with sandalwood from the afternoon prayer. The day had been long, filled with lessons, quiet chores, and the usual murmur of novice monks learning to bow, to breathe, to be. Yet now, in the stillness of night, I felt as though the earth itself had fallen into meditation. I closed my eyes and let my thoughts drift, not to chase them, but to watch them pass. Like leaves carried away by the river, I could hear somewhere beyond the trees. I remembered the words of my master earlier that evening. Peace, he had said, is not the absence of sound, nor the absence of thought. Peace is the moment you no longer resist what is. Those words had stayed with me, echoing through the quiet corridors of my mind. As I inhaled, I could feel the cool air fill my chest. As I exhaled, I imagined the day leaving me, all its weight dissolving into the night. I looked at the moon outside, the full golden circle floating above the bamboo grove. Its reflection danced gently upon the surface of the pond below, broken now and then by the soft ripple of a fish. I watched it for what felt like an eternity, until the line between me and the reflection blurred. The night carried a faint scent of jasmine. The flowers bloomed just behind the hut, their fragrance mixing with the scent of wet earth. It reminded me of my childhood, the small village where I was born, where my mother used to hum lullabies as she prepared rice by the fire. I had not thought of her in many moons. Yet tonight, her song returned, as soft as a breeze, slipping through the cracks of memory. I wondered if this too was part of meditation, the way old memories rise when the heart is quiet. Not to disturb, but to remind. I rose from where I sat and stepped outside. The wooden door creaked gently, as though bowing to the night. The path was cool beneath my feet, the stones smooth from centuries of footsteps before mine. The moonlight painted everything in silver, the roof of the pagoda, the curve of the hills, the edge of the distant forest. The world looked like a painting brushed by the hand of stillness itself. I walked slowly toward the garden. Each step felt like a prayer, each breath like a new beginning. The koi pond shimmered ahead, its surface trembling softly with a reflection of stars. I knelt beside it and touched the water with my fingertips. It was cool, alive, endlessly moving, yet never leaving its place. I thought of how the Buddha once described the mind as water restless when disturbed, clear when still. I watched the ripples spread outward, disappearing into calmness again. I smiled to myself. Perhaps enlightenment was not a sudden flash of light, but a slow returning, like water finding its own stillness. A night bird cried out from the forest. Its call echoed and then faded into the deep silence that followed. I could hear my heartbeat now, slow and steady, like the rhythm of an ancient drum. The stars above seemed so close that I felt I could reach out and touch them. There was no boundary between the sky and the earth, between sound and silence, between me and the world. I was simply here, breathing, aware and whole. I sat down on the smooth stone by the pond and folded my legs. My hands rested lightly on my knees. The sound of the wind brushing through the bamboo sounded like the ocean's tide, soft and eternal. I began to breathe in rhythm with it, letting go of every thought that tried to rise. Time became something unreal, something that dissolved like smoke. There was only breath, moonlight, and the soft hum of life around me. I could feel the energy of every living thing, the insects in the grass, the fish in the pond, the trees reaching upward into the stars. All of it was moving, breathing, being, and yet, within it all, a silence deeper than anything I had known held everything together. For the first time in a long while, I felt no desire to reach anywhere else. I was not chasing peace. Peace was already here, wrapping itself gently around me. I remember the first day I arrived at the monastery so many years ago. I had been restless, searching for answers, carrying the noise of the world inside me. I thought that enlightenment would be something grand, something that would shake the sky open. But now, sitting beneath this moon, I realized how quietly it could arrive like dew forming on the leaf. Unseen, unnoticed, but perfectly there. The night deepened. The air grew cooler, and the lamp inside my hut flickered out, leaving the world entirely in the embrace of the moon. The monastery bells rang softly in the distant slow chimes, signaling the hour before dawn meditation. I smiled, knowing I would not sleep yet, but rest all the same. Rest, after all, was not only of the body, but of the soul. The earth beneath me was steady, the sky above, endless, and I, somewhere in between, was simply breathing, part of it all. As I sat there, I noticed a single lotus floating on the pond. Its petals were half closed, heavy with dew, waiting for morning to bloom again. In that fragile flower, I saw something pure and wordless, the rhythm of existence itself. The lotus did not rush to open, did not fear the night. It trusted the dawn to come, as it always had. And I realized then that the same trust lived within me. I could rest because the universe itself was awake. The gentle wind brushed my cheek. The sound of the bamboo leaves whispered stories that had no words. I felt them telling me that every moment was already complete. I had nothing to add, nothing to take away. My breath was calm, my heart steady. I leaned back, eyes half closed, and listened to the night one last time before surrendering to it completely. The last thing I remember before drifting into a state beyond thought was the faint shimmer of moonlight across the pond and the quiet laughter of the wind moving through the trees. It felt as though the universe had exhaled and I was breathing within its sigh. The world was perfectly still, and in that stillness, I was home. The first light of dawn touched the edge of the mountains when the sound, the wooden gong, spread across the monastery courtyard. It was not loud, but it carried through the mist like a breath through silence. I opened my eyes, still sitting where I had fallen into a half-dream beside the pond. The moon had faded, and in its place, a pale golden glow began to rise behind the peaks. The world was changing colors, from silver to gold, from stillness to awakening. I felt the soft chill of morning on my skin and the faint weight of dew on my robe. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of pine and incense from the temple hall. I rose slowly and walked toward the main hall, where the master was already waiting. He sat near the altar, cross-legged on his worn mat, his eyes closed. His presence so calm that even the air seemed to hesitate before moving. The other monks were gathered in silence, some sweeping the courtyard, some lighting candles, each movement slow and deliberate. The bell rang again 3 soft tones. Then the chanting began. It started low, almost like a whisper, then swelled and flowed through the air like a river. The vibration passed through me, as if the chant itself was breathing me into being. When the chanting ended, the master opened his eyes. They were deep and clear, like a lake, untouched by wind. "Come," he said softly, looking at me. I stepped forward and bowed deeply, feeling the wood of the floor against my palms. "You watched the moon last night," he said, not as a question, but as a knowing. I nodded. "And what did you see?" I hesitated, then spoke quietly. "I saw myself, Master. I saw that peace does not come when the world is silent, but when the mind no longer struggles." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that felt older than time. "Good," he said, "but do not be proud of understanding. Even the clearest water can be disturbed by a single leaf." He gestured for me to sit beside him. The smell of old wood, incense, and morning light surrounded us. "Tell me," he continued, "when you watched the moon, did you see it move?" I frowned slightly. It moved slowly across the sky. Master, yes. He shook his head gently. No, it was not the moon that moved. It was the world beneath it turning. Remember this. What you see may not always be what is. The mind loves to make stories about stillness and motion, about gain and loss. But truth has no movement, to simply is. His words sank into me like water into dry earth. The hall was silent, except for the sound of sparrows nesting in the roof beams. I could feel my heart slowing, my breath deepening. The master stood and motioned for me to follow. We walked out into the courtyard where the morning mist still clung to the stones. Today, he said, you will learn the lesson of the empty cup. He led me to the tea house near the edge of the garden. It was a small wooden structure open to the view of the valley below. The horizon stretched endlessly, a soft blend of clouds and mountains. Inside, he poured tea into 2 small cups. The sound of the liquid filling the clay was as soft as falling rain. He handed 1 cup to me and began to pour into his own. But he did not stop, even when the cup was full. The tea overflowed, spilling onto the table, dripping down to the floor. I quickly reached out. Master, the cup is full. He looked at me calmly. And so is your mind. I lowered my hand. Understanding dawned, but with a sting of humility. He set down the pot. You come seeking wisdom, yet you carry your own ideas like heavy stones. How can I pour truth into you when your cup is already overflowing? I bowed my head, shame washing over me. Then, what should I do? Empty it, he said, simply. Empty everything you think you know. Only then will you taste the true flavor of tea. We sat in silence for a while, sipping from the warm cups. The tea was simple, earthy, and light. I could taste the calmness in it. The master spoke again. You see, every lesson in life is already before you. The tea, the water, the heat, the silence between us, they are all teachers. But you will only hear them when your mind is quiet enough to listen. He turned his gaze toward the valley. Do you know what makes a mirror useful? I thought for a moment. Its ability to reflect. Exactly, he said. But it can only reflect clearly when it is clean. If it is covered in dust, it shows nothing but itself. The mind is the same. Cleanse it from opinions, from desire, from fear, and you will see truth as it is. His words were like ripples spreading through my thoughts. I felt something loosen inside me, something that had been tight for years. I realized how much of my own noise I had been carrying, endless questioning, seeking, comparing. I had come to the monastery to learn peace, but I had been too busy trying to understand it. The master rose and began to walk toward the bamboo grove. I followed, stepping over fallen leaves glistening with dew. "Tell me," he said, without turning, "what is the sound of one hand clapping?" I paused. I had heard this question before, famous koan used by Zen teachers. I hesitated, unsure if there was even an answer. "I do not know, Master," I finally said. He stopped and looked at me, his eyes soft. "Good," he said. "Then keep listening." We continued walking in silence. The sound of the wind rustling through the bamboo filled the air, 1,000 thin stems striking each other like chimes. I could feel the rhythm of it inside me, as if my breath had become part of that music. The master stopped again and placed his hand gently on one of the bamboo stalks. "Do you see this?" he asked. "Yes, Master. It bends," he said, "but it does not break. That is strength, not resistance, but flexibility. Remember this when life sends storms your way. The tree that refuses to bend is the first to fall." He released the bamboo, and it swayed back gracefully, returning to its place. I watched it move, realizing how effortlessly it accepted the wind. I wondered how long I had been fighting the wind of my own mind, trying to stand tall while breaking slowly inside. As we returned toward the temple, we passed a group of novices sweeping the path. One of them accidentally struck a pebble, which rolled and landed at the master's feet. The boy immediately bowed, apologizing. The master picked up the small stone and held it out to me. "Is this stone alive?" he asked. I thought about it. "No, Master. It does not move. It does not breathe." He smiled. "Then tell me, what is it that allows this stone to exist?" "The earth, perhaps." "Yes," he said softly. "And what allows the earth to exist?" I was silent. He placed the stone in my hand. It was warm from the sun. "Even this has its nature," he said. "When you can see the life in the stone, the breath in the mountain, the silence in sound, you will begin to see without eyes." We walked on, and I carried the stone with me, feeling its weight shift slightly, as if reminding me of something I could not yet name. When we reached the old wooden bridge that crossed the stream, the master stopped again. The water flowed gently beneath us, carrying fallen petals downstream. "What do you see?" he asked. "Water," I replied. "Look again." I looked longer, and in the water I saw the reflection of the sky, the clouds moving, the trees swaying. "I see the sky, the trees, everything reflected," I said. He nodded. "So the water holds the sky, yet it never clings to it. When the wind blows, the reflection breaks apart. When the wind stops, it returns. Be like this water. Let thoughts come and go. Let joy and sorrow pass. And when the wind of emotion quiets, your mind will again reflect truth clearly." We stood there for a long time, watching the stream. The master's presence felt like a part of the flow, itself calm, timeless, unshakable. Finally, he turned to me and said, "You wish to rest deeply, to find peace so steady that even dreams bow before it. But peace will not come from running toward it. It comes when you stop running at all." I felt the truth of it settle inside me. All the searching, all the studying, all the effort had been like stirring muddy water to make it clear. I bowed low, feeling the weight of humility, but also the lightness of release. "Go now," the master said gently. "Return to the pond where you began your night. Sit again, but this time do not look for peace. Simply be there and let peace find you." I walked back through the garden, the master's words echoing softly within me. The morning sun had climbed higher now, painting the world in gentle gold. The pond shimmered again, and I could hear the same quiet breath of the earth that I had heard last night. I sat down, set the small stone beside me, and closed my eyes. The sound of the bamboo, the flowing water, the distant chanting all became one. I felt my thoughts rise and fall like waves, and then slowly, even they began to fade. There was no effort now, no grasping, only the feeling of being held by something infinite and kind. Somewhere in that vast stillness, I heard the master's voice again, not as sound, but as understanding. Peace does not need to be found. It only needs to be remembered. And as I breathed, I realized I was not learning the lesson. I was living it. The morning wind brushed my cheek, and I felt as though the entire sky was breathing with me. There was no master, no student, no separation of truth. The day passed like a slow, sacred song. By afternoon, the golden light stretched long across the courtyard, and the air carried a softness that made every sound feel distant, as though wrapped in cotton. I spent most of the day helping in the garden, pulling weeds from between the rows of lotus plants and stacking bundles of dried bamboo beside the shed. Every movement was deliberate, and the silence between each gesture was as meaningful as the gesture itself. The master often said, "When your hands work, let your mind rest. When your mind works, let your hands rest." I was beginning to understand that balance, how stillness could exist even in movement, and how the simplest task, if done with awareness, could be a form of meditation. As the sun began to lower behind the western hills, the monastery seemed to exhale. The younger monks gathered near the temple steps, whispering softly to one another, while the older ones moved like drifting clouds, their steps soundless and light. The master had gone to his chamber for meditation, and I felt drawn to the path that led away from the monastery, up toward the mountain ridge. I had walked it many times before, but this time something in me wanted to go deeper, not just into the forest, but into the silence that lived within me. The path curved gently through the bamboo grove. Each stalk swayed with the breeze, brushing against its neighbor with a soft rustle like the pages of an ancient scripture. The air smelled of moss and earth, and the late light shimmered through the leaves in golden threads. I walked slowly, barefoot, feeling the cool soil beneath my feet, grounding me with every step. My mind, usually full of quiet chatter, began to soften. The thoughts came slower, then fewer, until they felt like clouds that passed through a boundless sky. When I reached the clearing beyond the grove, I stopped. Before me stretched a vast valley of mist and green, the mountains folding into one another like sleeping giants. The sound of a river rose faintly from below, mingling with the distant call of a heron. I sat on a flat rock overlooking the valley and let the view sink into me. The world seemed to breathe in rhythm with my own lungs. The trees swayed as I inhaled. The mist moved as I exhaled. I realized then that peace was not something to be found. It was the natural rhythm of existence that revealed itself when the mind grew quiet enough to feel it. I closed my eyes and began to listen. The forest was alive in its own symphony, the whisper of wind through leaves, the chirping of insects, the occasional crack of a twig under some small creature's step. None of these sounds disturbed the silence. They were the silence made audible. I remembered what the master once said: silence is not the absence of sound. It is the space that holds all sound. My breath deepened, slow and steady. I could feel the air enter me as something pure and leave as something softer. With every breath, I felt myself merging a little more with the rhythm of everything around me. A dragonfly hovered near my face, its wings glinting like glass in the last rays of light. It hovered for a moment, then darted away. I smiled without moving, feeling a quiet joy rise within me, not the kind of joy that bursts and fades, but the kind that hums gently like a hidden stream. Time seemed to dissolve. I no longer knew how long I had been sitting there, but at some point the colors of the sky began to change. The light turned from gold to rose, then from rose to a deep, tranquil blue. The first stars appeared, tiny candles in the great dome above. I lay back on the rock, looking up. The stars did not twinkle as they did in the village. Here, high in the mountains, they shone steady and clear. I felt small beneath them, but not insignificant. I felt like a thread in an infinite tapestry, essential, even if unseen. A soft wind brushed over me, carrying the scent of pine and rain. I thought of the master again and his endless patience. His lessons were never about words, but about presence. He never told me what to see. He only guided me to look. Now I was beginning to understand. The forest, the stars, the breath all were part of the same lesson. The same truth whispered in different languages as the night deepened. I rose and began walking toward the river whose voice I had heard earlier. The path was narrow and wound through a small thicket of trees. Fireflies flickered in the dark like sparks from a hidden fire, their lights dancing to some secret rhythm. The sound of flowing water grew louder until I reached the riverbank. The river shimmered under the moonlight, its surface shifting with silver ripples that looked alive. I sat down by the water's edge, letting my feet touch the cool flow. It was gentle, neither hurried nor still, moving with the ease of something that knew exactly where it was meant to go. I cupped some water in my hands and watched it trickle through my fingers. It occurred to me how everything I tried to hold too tightly eventually slipped away. Desires, fears, even moments of happiness. And yet, when I stopped trying to hold on, everything seemed to return to me in another form, calmer, clearer. The water did not belong to me, but it passed through me. That was enough. The river seemed to whisper a teaching of its own. That peace is not the stilling of motion, but harmony within motion. The current did not fight the rocks. It flowed around them. The sound of its passing was a song of acceptance. I felt my heart mirror that rhythm, steady, unresisting, full of quiet surrender. At that moment, I noticed the reflection of the moon trembling on the surface of the water. I stared at it for a long time. It reminded me of the lesson the master had given me earlier about the moon and the world's turning. The reflection moved as the water moved, but the moon itself never wavered. I realized then that the true self, the one beneath all noise and thought, was like that moon. The surface of the mind may ripple with fear or longing, but deep within, something untouched remains constant. That was the self I had been searching for, without knowing it's a self that needed no name, no achievement, no approval. The realization did not come with lightning or sound. It came softly, like the first drop of rain before a storm. Quiet, but full of depth. I felt tears in my eyes, though not from sadness. They came like dew, forming naturally in the stillness. I let them fall into the river, watching them vanish into the current. Perhaps they had been waiting for this moment, not to be shed in sorrow, but to return to the hole from which they came. After some time, I began to hum a simple chant I had learned in the monastery. It was not a song of praise or prayer, but of presence. Each tone rose and fell with my breath, and the river seemed to hum along with me. The sound vibrated through my chest, and I could feel it resonating in the stones beneath me. It was as if the entire world had joined in the chant. Every leaf, every ripple, every star moving in unison with the pulse of existence. When the chant faded, I sat in silence again. My mind was quiet, not the forced quiet of discipline, but the natural quiet of understanding. Thoughts no longer pulled me. They passed like birds across the sky. I did not chase them. I simply watched them come and go. I realized that this was the journey the Master had spoken of, not a movement from one place to another, but a deepening into what already is. The path of inner peace was not outward. It was inward, yet without walls or end. The night grew cooler, and the sound of the river became my heartbeat. I leaned back, looking at the sky once more. The Milky Way stretched above like a trail of light across eternity. I felt myself dissolve into that vastness, not disappearing, but expanding. I was the river, the stone, the breath, the moonlight. There was no separation left to cross. At some point, I must have drifted into a state beyond waking and dreaming. My body was still, but my awareness felt infinite. I could sense the world turning beneath me, the breath of the trees, the heartbeat of the earth. Time had no meaning. Here, there was only presence, endless and pure. When I opened my eyes again, dawn was approaching. A faint blue hue touched the edges of the sky, and the river shimmered softly in the morning light. Birds began to sing, one by one, like the first notes of a great symphony. I rose slowly, feeling lighter than I had in years. The air felt alive against my skin, every sound vivid and new. I bowed to the river, whispering a quiet thank you not to anyone, but to everything. As I walked back toward the monastery, the world seemed different, though nothing had changed. The same trees, the same path, the same breeze, but now I could see their silence. I could feel their stillness beneath the movement. I understood now that peace was never something to find, because it had never left. It had been waiting beneath the surface of every breath, every sound, every step. When I reached the gate, the Master was standing there as if he had been expecting me. He said nothing. He only smiled, a slow, knowing smile that seemed to say, "You have seen what cannot be taught." I bowed deeply, and for the first time, I did not bow to learn. I bowed to acknowledge what was already known within me, the stillness that had no beginning and no end. The journey was not over, yet I had already arrived. The Master turned and began to walk toward the temple hall. I followed behind him, each step falling into the rhythm of his. The sun rose behind the mountains, spilling gold into the valley, and I could feel its warmth spreading through everything, the stones, the air, the beating of my heart. The world was awake again, and so was I. And in that silent awakening, I knew the journey of inner peace was not a path to walk, but a way to live. Moment by moment, breath by breath, endlessly returning to the still center of all things. The night before my awakening was unlike any other. The moon hung low over the monastery's ancient roof, its pale light slipping through the wooden shutters of my small room, painting the floor with silver lines. I could hear the whisper of the wind outside, carrying with it the soft murmur of distant bells. Sleep would not come to me that night. My mind, though calm from months of meditation, felt as though it stood on the edge of something vast and unseen ocean that called to me. My breath deepened naturally, and I felt each exhale melt into the stillness. The faint smell of sandalwood lingered in the air, reminding me of the countless nights I had sat just like this, waiting for something I couldn't name. And yet, tonight felt different. It felt alive, as if existence itself was waiting for me to open my eyes in a way I never had before dawn. As the first hour of dawn began to rise, I walked silently to the meditation hall. The world was utterly still, no footsteps, only the soft hum of the universe. I sat in my usual place, cross-legged on the straw mat, and closed my eyes. The candlelight flickered beside me, and I followed my breath, each inhalation a wave washing against the shore of my body. Slowly, the boundaries between breath and body, between sound and silence, began to dissolve. I was no longer sitting in the hall. I was the hall, the breath, the silence, and everything beyond. For a moment, fear touched me. Fear of losing myself completely. My teacher's words, "To awaken, you must be willing to vanish." Time became meaningless. Memories of my life, my childhood in the mountain village, my years of study, my doubts, my hopes all began to flicker before me like dying embers. Each one burned bright for a moment, then faded into the darkness. The self I had built through stories and thoughts began to crumble gently, not in pain, but in surrender. I saw clearly that every joy, every sorrow, every victory and defeat had been part of a single, endless dance. The one who suffered and the one who rejoiced were never separate. They were two ripples on the same boundless ocean. I felt my breath stop not out of force, but because it was no longer needed. There was no one left to breathe. What remained was awareness, pure, infinite, untouched. It wasn't my awareness. It was the same consciousness that gave birth to stars, to rivers, to all living things. I realized that I had never truly been apart from it. All these years, I had been like a wave searching for the sea, not realizing I was the sea. And in that moment, all striving ceased. The search ended, not because I had found something new, but because I saw that there had never been anything missing. Tears rolled down my face, not from sorrow, but from a sweetness too deep to describe. I opened my eyes, and the world looked the same, yet utterly transformed. The candle flame danced as it always did. The walls stood where they had always stood. But now they shimmered with a quiet radiance, as if each thing was alive, aware, and in perfect harmony. Even the smallest sound, the creak of the wood, the whisper of the wind felt sacred. I understood then what my teacher had meant when he said, "The awakened see the world not as it appears, but as it truly is eternal, luminous, complete." I rose and stepped outside. The sun had begun to rise behind the mountains, turning the mist into gold. The monks were beginning their morning chants, their voices weaving through the still air like threads of light. As I stood there, I realized that awakening wasn't a destination, but a return to what had always been true. There was no grand revelation, no thunderous vision from the heavens. It was simple, quiet, and profoundly ordinary. I felt the cool earth beneath my feet, and for the first time, I was fully there. No separation, no distance. The grass shimmered with dew, and even the smallest droplet seemed to hold the entire sky within it. I walked down to the temple garden where the lotus pond glowed under the morning light. I watched as a single lotus bloomed, its petals slowly unfurling, untouched by the muddy water below. I smiled, realizing how perfectly it mirrored the human heart, rooted in imperfection, yet capable of such beauty and purity. Every moment of pain, every mistake, had been the mud that nourished this blooming. Without it, awakening could not exist. The lotus does not curse the mud. It rises because of it. For the next few days, I spoke very little. Words seemed too small to carry what I had experienced. Yet, as I interacted with others, I noticed something subtle. People began to soften around me. It wasn't anything I said or did. It was as if they could sense the peace that now moved through me. When the young monks asked me questions, I no longer tried to give them answers. I simply listened, truly listened, and often that was enough. I began to understand that teaching was not about transferring knowledge, was about embodying truth so deeply that others could feel it in your presence. One evening, I sat beneath a Bodhi tree. An old memory surfaced of the day I first came to the monastery, restless and lost. I remembered how desperate I had been to find enlightenment, how I thought it was something distant and difficult. Now I smiled at that younger self with tenderness. The journey had been long and winding, yet every step had been necessary. Even the moments of despair had been doorways leading me closer to the truth. The path had never been about reaching somewhere else. It had been about uncovering what was already here. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and violet, I closed my eyes once more. The world around me seemed to breathe in unison: the trees, the birds, the earth, the stars, all pulsating with one silent rhythm. In that rhythm, I felt myself dissolve again, not into emptiness, but into completeness. There was no longer a me seeking peace. There was only peace itself, aware of its own vastness. I understood then that awakening is not a one-time event. It unfolds endlessly, moment after moment, like waves returning to the shore of eternity. In the days that followed, I began to see suffering differently. When people came to me burdened with pain, I no longer saw their sorrow as something to fix. I saw it as a cloud passing through a vast sky. The sky was never harmed by the cloud. It simply allowed it to drift. And so, I too allowed every emotion, every thought to arise and fade naturally. I realized that compassion is not pity, is understanding. To truly see someone's suffering is to recognize your shared essence within them. When I looked into the eyes of others, I saw myself reflected back again and again, infinite and formless. One morning, as the monks gathered around me for meditation, I told them gently, "The moment of awakening is not far from you. It is not hidden in scriptures or in distant mountains. It is in your breath, in the sound of the wind, in the stillness between thoughts. When you stop trying to grasp it, it reveals itself." I watched as their eyes filled with quiet wonder, the same wonder I had once felt. In that moment, I understood that the true gift of awakening is not the peace it brings to oneself, but the peace it shares with all beings. As night returned and the stars emerged one by one, I sat again by the lotus pond. The reflection of the moon rippled across the water, and I saw my face within it, not as a monk, not as a seeker, but as something boundless. I smiled softly, knowing that this reflection was not mine alone. It belonged to everyone who ever sought peace, to everyone who ever looked into the night sky and wondered who they truly were. And with that, I whispered to the universe, "I am home." The wind carried my words away, blending them into the eternal silence from which everything arises. And in that silence, the journey continued, lessly awakening, endlessly free. The nights after awakening felt like stepping into a world both utterly familiar and endlessly new. Silence had changed. Its texture was no longer the absence of sound, but a living, breathing presence. I would lie on the thin mat in my room, the paper lantern flickering softly by my side, and listen to that silence. It wasn't empty. It hummed with life, like the quiet pulse of the earth beneath my feet. Every breath seemed to carry an ancient rhythm, something older than time itself. I could feel my body dissolving into that rhythm, as if I were being cradled by the very heartbeat of existence. The mind that once chased thoughts like a restless child now rested in that silence as naturally as a bird rests in the air. Sleep came, not as a necessity, but as a continuation of peace. In those hours before dawn, I would often wake not from restlessness, but from a gentle awareness that never really slept. Outside, the world lay wrapped in mist. The bamboo groves whispered softly when the wind passed through them, and sometimes the cry of a night bird echoed far away, breaking the stillness just enough to remind me that everything was awake, even in its rest. I would sit up, watching the soft light crawl across the wooden floor, and realize that rest was not something I entered or left. It was the natural state of being. When all grasping ceased, the monks began to notice changes in me. They said my steps had become slower, lighter, as though I were walking on water. When I spoke, my words carried a calm they could feel but not define. I didn't try to explain. How could I? Words could only touch the surface of this vast silence. I found myself speaking less each day, not out of choice, but because silence said everything that needed to be said. Even when others spoke, I could hear the quiet beneath their words, the space from which sound was born. It was there, in that sacred space, that I began to live. Days passed in a kind of seamless flow. The boundaries between action and rest, between doing and being, dissolved completely. Sweeping the monastery courtyard became meditation. Drinking tea became prayer. Watching the moon rise became a lesson in eternity. The silence followed me everywhere, not as a shadow, but as the very essence of light. Sometimes, during meditation, I would feel the line between myself and the world disappear entirely. I would become the hum of the insects, the scent of pine, the drifting clouds. It was not imagination, it was remembrance. Everything had always been one, but only now could I see it clearly. One evening, as the sun slipped below the mountain ridge, I walked to the small stone bridge that crossed the stream behind the monastery. The water flowed gently beneath, carrying fallen leaves toward the valley. I watched one leaf spiral slowly in the current, neither fighting nor surrendering, simply being carried by what was. That leaf, I realized, was the perfect teacher of rest. It did not strive to reach the sea. It already belonged to it. To rest, truly rest, is not to stop moving. It is to move without resistance, to let life carry you in perfect trust. That night, as I returned to my chamber, I lit a single candle and sat beside it. The flame wavered in the breeze, its light breathing softly on the walls. I gazed at it and whispered to myself, "Even the flame burns without hurry." the silence deepened. My eyes closed, not in sleep, but in surrender. Memories drifted through faces, moments, laughter, sorrow, arising and fading in a rhythm too beautiful to disturb. I saw how every joy and pain had been necessary, every path sacred, every breath a note in the great song of existence. I smiled through tears that came without reason, tears that carried both grief and gratitude. Grief for all the selves I had once been, gratitude for the truth that had carried me through them all. Sometimes, during the stillness of the night, I would feel the presence of my teacher. Though he had passed long ago, his voice would echo softly within my heart. Rest is not sleep. It is the return to your original nature. I would bow my head, whispering my thanks to the unseen, and the air around me would feel thick with warmth, as if he were there beside me, smiling. I understood then that the true teacher never dies. His words dissolve into the silence, and that silence continues to teach forever. In the days that followed, visitors began coming to the monastery. Some were travelers seeking peace, others were wanderers broken by the noise of the world. They would sit before me, pouring out their pain, their fears, their confusion. I listened without judgment, without the need to offer advice. I simply shared my silence with them. Often they would weep, sometimes they would laugh, and always they would leave lighter. I realized that peace cannot be taught, can only be felt. And when your heart is at rest, it becomes a mirror in which others see their own peace reflected. One afternoon, a young monk approached me with trembling hands. He asked, "Master, how do I find what you have found?" I smiled gently, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "Stop looking." His eyes widened in confusion, but I could see something shift in him, a small seed beginning to stir. He bowed deeply and walked away, and I knew that one day he would understand. Awakening, rest, enlightenment, these are not destinations, but awakenings to the simplicity of now. The seasons changed quietly. Spring returned, painting the hills in green and gold. The sound of rain became my companion. It fell on the roof in soft, rhythmic patterns, each drop a reminder of impermanence. One night, during a gentle rain, I walked barefoot through the garden. The earth was cool and damp beneath my feet. I looked up and saw the moon veiled in thin clouds, its light scattered across the wet leaves. I felt no separation between myself and the world. It was as if the universe was breathing through me. The rain touched my skin like the hands of an old friend, and I realized I was home wherever I stood. Years passed this way, and I lost count of them. Time, for me, had become a ripple in the vast sea of stillness. My body aged. The lines on my hands deepened and my steps grew slower. But the silence within me never changed. It remained pure, vast, and awake. I began to see beauty even in decay, the way a dying leaf curled gracefully, the way an old wall crumbled back into earth. Nothing was wasted. Everything was returning to rest, to its source. I found joy in watching things end, knowing that ending was only another form of peace. One evening, I walked once more to the lotus pond. The blossoms had begun to close as twilight descended. The air was cool, carrying the faint fragrance of jasmine. I sat by the water's edge and gazed at my reflection. The face that looked back at me was weathered, the eyes soft with years of silence. Yet, beneath the wrinkles and the silver hair, I saw no self-only awareness watching itself. I whispered softly, "So this is rest." The pond shimmered, reflecting the stars that had begun to appear, and for a moment, it felt as if the entire sky was bowing in stillness. The breath within me slowed naturally, not from weariness, but from fulfillment. There was no desire left, no fear, no waiting. I could feel the pulse of life flowing effortlessly through me, and I realized that death, too, was part of this great rest. To die was not to end it, was to return completely to silence. I closed my eyes, letting the night embrace me, and felt the same peace that had once filled me on the morning of my awakening. Only now it was deeper, boundless, eternal. The crickets sang in the distance, their rhythm merging with the sound of the wind in the trees. The universe was breathing again, through everything, through me. I felt myself dissolve, not in darkness, but in light, so gentle it could only be called love. There were no thoughts left, no boundaries, no self. Only the great silence remained alive, infinite, resting in itself. When dawn came, the monks found me sitting there by the pond, a faint smile on my lips, my body still as the morning mist. They said the air around me shimmered as though the world itself was blessing the silence I had become. But I was no longer there. I had melted into that peace, into that wordless stillness that had always been my true home. And so, the silence continued through the rustling of the leaves, through the flowing of the stream, through the chants that rose each morning. Those who came after me said they could still feel it when they sat beneath the old Bodhi tree, the same stillness that had carried me through life. They called it the silent rest, but I knew it was never something to be named. It was simply what is, and somewhere beyond the sound of bells, beyond the breath of the wind, beyond all beginnings and endings, that silence remains watching, breathing, eternally at peace.